That was the entire text my wife sent me one Thursday night. No explanation, no heart emoji like she used to add, just those cold 6 words. I stared at the screen, waiting for another message, something, anything, to follow. Nothing came. The thing is, she hadn't really spoken to me in weeks, not properly anyway. I'd been living in this quiet, hollow routine, watching her drift further away each day like some ship I wasn't allowed to board anymore. But that night, holding my phone with her text glowing back at me, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just hurt, I was done being invisible. I decided to stay awake. I sat by the window, watching the driveway like a detective who didn't want to admit he already knew the truth. Around 2 a.m., headlights swept across the front yard. I stood there, frozen, as a dark car rolled slowly to the curb. She stepped out. She didn't see me in the window, but I saw everything. The way she laughed before closing the car door. The way she lingered there for a moment, like she didn't want the night to end. My chest burned like someone was crushing it. I didn't confront her. I just listened as the front door creaked open, as her footsteps padded down the hallway, and as she slipped into bed like nothing had happened. I lay there, facing the ceiling, wondering how we'd gone from falling asleep holding hands to me, pretending I was asleep, while she carried her secrets into my house. The next morning, she didn't even look at me. She walked past me, humming under her breath, like I wasn't standing there with 1,000 questions in my throat. That's when I realized I wasn't going to get answers by asking. I'd have to find them myself. And that decision, as pathetic as it sounds, was the start of everything. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that car. The silhouette of her leaning in the window, smiling like a woman I didn't know anymore. By the time the sun came up, I'd convinced myself I was going to confront her. I rehearsed what I'd say. Something calm but firm, something that didn't make me sound like the desperate, paranoid husband I felt like. But when she walked into the kitchen that morning, wearing that same neutral expression she'd worn for weeks, all I could manage was a weak, "Where were you last night?" She didn't even flinch. She poured herself coffee and said, "Out with friends," as if that explained everything. No names, no details. Just a dismissive shrug and a sip of coffee. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat there at the table, gripping my mug so hard I thought it might crack, while she scrolled through her phone like I wasn't even in the room. Something about her calmness scared me more than any angry outburst ever could. It was like she wasn't even trying to cover her tracks anymore. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about me being insecure. Something was going on, and she didn't even care if I found out. Later that evening, I noticed something strange. She left her laptop open on the dining table, and I swear she never leaves it unattended. Normally, it's glued to her side like an extra limb. I told myself I wasn't going to look. I'm not that kind of guy, right? But then I thought about all the times I'd stayed up at night, wondering if I was just a fool pretending everything was fine. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. There wasn't much, just a few tabs open, some emails, but one name caught my eye. A name I'd never heard before, with a series of messages that didn't sound like work or friendship. I didn't even have to read them all. The tone was enough. That sinking feeling in my gut told me everything I needed to know. She walked in just as I closed the laptop. I don't know if she noticed the panic on my face, but she looked at me for the first time in weeks. Really looked at me. It wasn't love in her eyes. It wasn't even anger. It was something cold, something like pity. She just said, "Don't wait up for me tonight," and walked out again. And that was when I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Something bigger than me was unraveling, and I needed to see it for what it really was, even if it destroyed me in the process. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights off, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every sound in the house felt louder, every tick of the clock a reminder that something inside me was breaking. When Miriam came down the stairs, dressed in that black coat she only wears on special occasions, I knew this wasn't just another casual night out with friends. She didn't even glance at me as she grabbed her keys and headed for the door. I waited until I heard the car engine fade into the distance before I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back. I don't know what I was expecting to feel, maybe shame or guilt for tailing my own wife, but all I felt was a cold, desperate determination. I followed her at a distance, my old sedan barely keeping up with the smooth, confident pace of her car. Every turn she took, every red light she stopped at, it felt like a test I couldn't fail. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a bar I'd never seen before. It wasn't one of the usual places she'd go with friends. This place looked like it had been forgotten by time. A dim neon sign flickering, a few lonely cars parked out front. She sat in her car for a moment, staring at her phone, smiling in that way I hadn't seen in months. Then she got out, and that smile stayed on her face as she walked toward the entrance. I waited, watching the door like some pathetic detective. Every muscle in me screamed a storm inside, but fear held me back. I didn't want the truth to hit me all at once. I wanted to peel it apart slowly, like tearing off a bandage 1 inch at a time. After 10 minutes of sitting in my car, I couldn't take it anymore. I went in. The bar was dark, the kind of place where the air smells like old wood and stale beer. And there she was, sitting at the far end of the counter, leaning in close to a man I'd never seen before. He was older, maybe late 40s, dressed sharp in a way that made me feel like I'd walked straight into someone else's life. They were laughing, not the polite kind of laugh you give to strangers, but the deep, warm kind of laugh that comes from comfort and history. I froze. I didn't move closer, didn't even breathe too hard. I just stood there in the doorway, my throat tightening as I watched her touch his arm lightly, like she used to do with me when we first started dating. For a moment, I wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was an old friend. Maybe this was nothing. But the way she looked at him, the way his hand brushed against hers, told me everything I didn't want to know. I walked out before she saw me. I don't even remember driving home. All I remember is sitting in the driveway, staring at our dark house, wondering how much of my marriage had been a lie. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to break something, but when she came home hours later and casually said she was tired, I said nothing. I just nodded like a fool, swallowed my anger, and lay awake next to her, listening to her even breathing, while my heart pounded like I was buried alive. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask her for answers anymore. I was going to take them. The morning after I saw Miriam with that man, I felt like a ghost in my own house. She moved around me as if nothing had happened, as if our life together wasn't hanging by a thread. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and scream, "Who was he?" But I didn't. I just sat there sipping my coffee, my mind spinning. Something about her calmness terrified me. It was as if she'd already rehearsed every lie and didn't care if I caught on. I spent that entire day pacing in my office, coming up with ways to confront her, but every scenario I played in my head ended with her gaslighting me, telling me I was imagining things, that I was insecure, that I was going crazy. I needed proof, undeniable proof, something that would make her face the truth without an escape route. That evening, I told her I had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until midnight. She barely looked up from her phone, just mumbled, "Okay," like it made no difference to her. My plan was simple. I would leave, wait for her to think I was gone, and then come back quietly to see what she'd do. If she left the house, I would follow her again. If she stayed home, well, at least I'd know. Around 7:30, I parked my car a few streets away and walked back, staying low like some second-rate spy. From the shadows of our yard, I watched as she got ready, putting on that same black coat, applying lipstick she hadn't worn for me in months. It felt like watching a stranger live inside my wife's skin. I followed her again, but this time, instead of going to the bar, she drove to a small motel off the highway. My stomach dropped as I watched her pull into the lot, her headlights briefly illuminating the peeling paint on the doors and the cheap neon sign that buzzed vacancy. I saw her walk up to one of the rooms and knock softly. The door opened. A man's silhouette appeared. It was him, the same man from the bar. He pulled her inside with a familiarity that made my blood run cold. I sat there in my car for over an hour, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. My mind kept flipping between anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. This wasn't just a fling or an innocent friendship. It was betrayal, raw and undeniable. By the time I got home, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. When she walked in later that night, her hair slightly messy, smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't own, I almost lost it. But I forced myself to stay calm. I needed more than anger. I needed a plan. The next day, I installed a small recording device under the passenger seat of her car. It felt wrong, dirty even, but I couldn't trust her anymore. I had to know the truth, all of it. I had to hear it from her own lips, even if it destroyed me. When I played back the first recording, what I heard made my blood turn to ice. The first time I pressed play, I almost stopped it right away. I wasn't ready to hear her voice saying things that would break me. But the second I heard her laughing, the kind of laugh that hadn't graced our house in months, I couldn't look away from the truth anymore. The recording was scratchy, filled with background noise, but I could make out every word that mattered. She wasn't just talking to him. She was pouring her heart out in a way she hadn't done with me in years. She said things like, "I don't even recognize him anymore," and "I feel like I'm stuck living with a ghost." And the worst part? The softness in her voice when she spoke to him. I'd forgotten she could sound like that, gentle, warm, alive. I sat there with my headphones on, listening to my wife talk about me like I was already dead to her, while this stranger on the other end called her darling and told her she deserved better. Better than me. There was a moment halfway through the recording where she hesitated. I could hear her voice drop to a whisper, almost like she was afraid someone might hear. And then she said it, words that made my chest feel like it was caving in. "I think I'm falling in love with you." I slammed the stop button so hard, I thought I broke the recorder. My hands were trembling, my vision blurring as I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. I wasn't just losing her, she was already gone. The woman sleeping next to me every night, the woman I'd built my life with, wasn't mine anymore. That night, I couldn't even look at her. I lay there on the couch while she slept in our bed, and I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. Every sound, every creak of the house made me angrier. I felt like a fool. A pathetic fool who'd been begging for scraps of attention while she was out giving her whole heart to someone else. The next day, I decided to push harder. If she wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd rip it out of the shadows myself. I went through her car when she left for work, searching for anything. Receipts, notes, something tangible. That's when I found the small, folded piece of paper wedged between the seat and the console. It was a receipt from that same motel, dated just 3 nights ago. Room 12, paid in cash. My hands clenched so tightly that the paper ripped in half. That evening, I didn't greet her when she came home. I didn't ask her how her day was. I just watched her from across the room as she smiled down at her phone, thumbs moving fast. She looked like a teenager again, glowing with that giddy kind of happiness. Only it wasn't because of me. I knew then that my marriage wasn't just dying, it was being strangled right in front of me. But I also knew I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I had one last move to make. I couldn't stop thinking about room 12 at that dingy motel. The more I replayed it in my head, the more I realized I didn't just want answers from her. I wanted them from him. The man who had been taking what was mine. The man whose voice I'd heard on that recording, casually tearing down everything I'd spent years building with Miriam. It was eating me alive. I couldn't keep sitting in my house, watching her drift further away, while he got all the smiles, the laughter, and the pieces of her I thought only belonged to me. The next night, I waited until Miriam left the house again. I watched from the shadows as she drove off. No goodbye, no explanation. Like I was just another piece of furniture. But this time, I didn't follow her. I went straight to the motel. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like my chest might explode, and my hands were sweating on the steering wheel as I pulled into the gravel parking lot. There it was, room 12. The blinds were half drawn, and I could see the faint glow of a TV inside. I parked a few spaces away, trying to calm myself, but the longer I sat there, the worse it got. My head was spinning with images of her in there with him, laughing the way she used to laugh with me, touching him the way she used to touch me. Something in me snapped. I stormed across the parking lot before I could think twice, my fist tightening around the receipt I'd found in her car. I knocked on the door, hard. At first, there was silence. Then, I heard footsteps. The door cracked open just enough for me to see him. He wasn't what I expected. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with that polished, confident look that made me feel like I'd walked in wearing rags. He looked me up and down, almost smirking, like he already knew who I was. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. Too steady. "You know damn well who I am," I snapped, holding up the torn receipt. "Stay away from my wife." For a second, his expression didn't change. He just stared at me with this cold, almost amused look, and then he chuckled. That laugh, low, dismissive, made my blood boil. "Your wife?" he said slowly, as if tasting the words. "Buddy, if she was really yours, she wouldn't be coming here." I don't remember deciding to do it, but my hand shot forward and grabbed him by the collar. He didn't flinch, didn't even raise his hands. He just looked at me like I was some pathetic, broken man, which maybe I was. I felt my grip falter as his smirk deepened. "Go home," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're already too late." I don't even remember leaving. One second I was standing there, trembling, my knuckles white, and the next I was back in my car, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I barely recognized the man looking back at me. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, like I'd just been gutted alive. When I got home that night, Miriam wasn't there yet. I sat in the dark, waiting, listening to the silence of our house, wondering if she'd ever been mine to begin with. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about her cheating. It was about me holding on to something that was already gone. But I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. I decided that the next time, I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her tell me everything. The night after I faced him, I felt like a hollow shell walking around my own house. My mind was buzzing with every insult, every smirk, every dismissive glance he had given me, and I could not shake his words. "You're already too late." They were burned into my brain, looping endlessly. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, watching the clock, waiting for Miriam to come home, rehearsing what I would say, and planning how I wouldn't let her deflect this time. There would be no vague excuses, no fake smiles. She was going to talk, whether she wanted to or not. When she finally walked through the door just past midnight, I didn't give her the chance to escape upstairs. I was standing right there in the hallway, my arms crossed, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out every rational thought. She froze for a second when she saw me, like she wasn't expecting me to be awake, then tried to give me that tired, casual, long day smile. I didn't let her speak. "Who is he, Miriam?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She blinked, pretending not to understand, but I pushed harder. "The man at the motel, the one you've been laughing with while I'm sitting here like a fool. I know everything, so stop lying and just say it." Her face changed then. The pretense, the mask she'd been wearing for weeks, cracked. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Instead, she sighed and sat down at the table, like she had been carrying a weight for months and was suddenly too tired to keep standing. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," she said softly, her eyes on the floor. My chest tightened. "Like what?" I demanded, my voice breaking. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she looked at me with eyes that seemed so unfamiliar, like I was staring at a stranger. "Calvin, I don't love you anymore," she said. There it was, the sentence that sliced through me like a blade. I'd suspected it, feared it, but hearing it from her lips was worse than I ever imagined. I felt the room tilt. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. I sat down across from her, gripping the edge of the table just to stop my hands from shaking. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been seeing him?" She looked away. "A few months," she whispered. "It just happened. I didn't plan it." Her words cut deeper with every syllable. A few months. All those nights I sat alone, wondering if I was losing my mind. She was with him. But then she said something that stunned me. "It's not just him, Calvin. It's me. I'm not the same person anymore. We're not the same. I tried to feel what I used to feel for you, but it's gone. I didn't want to hurt you, but staying here, pretending, was hurting both of us." I felt a mix of rage and desperation bubbling inside me. "Pretending?" I spat. "We built a life together. I gave you everything. I stood by you when you were nothing, and now you just, what? Throw me aside because you're bored? Because some guy in a cheap motel makes you feel alive?" My voice was shaking, and I hated how weak I sounded. She didn't respond, just stared at me with that same pitying look I'd seen before. That look made me feel small, like I was already a ghost in my own life. I realized that nothing I said would change her mind. She was gone, even if she was sitting right in front of me. When she finally stood up to leave the room, I sat there in silence, my head spinning. I wasn't just losing her, I was losing everything. But deep down, beneath the pain and humiliation, a new feeling began to grow. Not anger, not even heartbreak. Something darker, something that whispered, "This isn't over." That night after Miriam walked upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table until the sun started creeping through the blinds. I felt emptied out, like there was nothing left inside me but the faint hum of exhaustion. Her words kept echoing in my mind. "I don't love you anymore." No matter how much it hurt, I knew she was telling the truth. We were done. We'd been done for a long time, and I was just too blind, too stubborn to admit it. But as I sat there, something changed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt free. Free from the constant guessing, the waiting, the crushing silence. I'd been holding on to someone who didn't want to be held, and maybe the bravest thing I could do was let her go. The next morning, when she came down to the kitchen, we didn't fight. We didn't even raise our voices. I told her I knew we couldn't fix this, and I wasn't going to beg her to stay anymore. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes. Sadness, maybe even relief. She nodded, and for the first time in months, she looked at me like I was a human being, not just some shadow hovering around her life. We agreed it was time to end it. The days that followed were hard, I won't lie. Packing up her things, watching the house slowly empty of her presence, it felt like ripping off a bandage over and over. But there was also a strange calm in it. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I wasn't waiting for her to speak to me or pretending things were okay. I was just breathing again. A few weeks later, I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I went hiking, something I'd always loved but had given up because Miriam hated the outdoors. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in ages because I'd been so wrapped up in saving a marriage that didn't want to be saved. I even started picking up my guitar again, the one gathering dust in the corner of the living room. One evening, sitting by myself on the porch with a cup of coffee, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. She had made her choice, and while it hurt, I finally understood that sometimes people grow apart, and it's not always about blame. We weren't the same people we were when we first fell in love, and maybe that's okay. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but something better replaced it. Hope. Hope that I could rebuild my life, that I could find happiness again, maybe even love again someday, with someone who actually wanted to hold my hand through it all. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man who survived something heavy and was still standing. So, here I am, writing this final piece of my story. If you're reading this and you've ever felt invisible, like I did, know this. You're not broken just because someone stops loving you. Sometimes losing them is the only way to find yourself again.